She was 23, and for all purposes, an orphan. Her father had given her $20 and the address of a land office in a county she had never heard of. And with that, Cora Maddox was cast out. She had no plan, no family to turn to, just a small, worn whittling of a songbird in her pocket, and the $20 that felt as thin as a winter leaf. And with that $20, she filed a claim on a flooded limestone quarry that everyone in the dusty Texas town called Maddox's Folly. But what nobody knew, what the mocking men at the land office and her own distant family could never have guessed, was that 12 feet below the still blue water lay a secret that would not stay buried forever. A secret of silver and of bone. Settle in and stay close for this one, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Cora's life had been shaped by what was absent. Her mother, Elspeth, had died when Cora was 6, leaving behind a silence in their small clapboard house that her father, a man more comfortable with ledgers than with feelings, never learned how to fill. Elspeth had been the warmth, the song, the source of stories, and she had left Cora with a single, tangible piece of her love. A small, smooth bird she had carved from a piece of scrap pine, its wings half lifted as if in mid-flight. Cora carried it always. Her father, John Maddox, remarried within 2 years, bringing home a woman named Adelaide, who was crisp and orderly and saw Cora not as a daughter to be loved, but as a problem to be managed. Adelaide valued propriety and smooth surfaces, and Cora, with her quiet ways and her calloused hands, was a constant, rough-grained disruption. Cora found her solace not in the house, but in the barn and the fields, in the company of Silas, the old ranch hand who had worked for her father for 30 years. Silas was a man of few words and immense capability. He saw in Cora a reflection of his own steady nature. He taught her things a girl of her station wasn't meant to know. He showed her how to read the grain of wood, how to mix mortar that would hold against a norther, how to set a stone so it sat true and level. He taught her the names of tools, the froe, the adze, the draw knife. He taught her how to mend a harness with an awl and waxed thread, how to brace a sagging fence post, and how to listen to the land. Things that look broken, he'd tell her, his voice a low rumble, ain't always useless. Sometimes they're just waiting for the right pair of hands. He was her true parent, her only mentor, and when he died of a lung fever the winter she turned 20, the last of the warmth in her father's house seemed to die with him. She inherited his worn leather tool roll, a treasure she kept hidden under her bed, and a profound understanding of the world as a place of things that could be fixed, built, and endured. It was a knowledge that her stepmother found unseemly and her father found inconvenient, a competence that made her an outsider in her own home. The end came not with a shout, but with the quiet closing of a ledger. It was a Tuesday morning in late April, the air already thick with the promise of summer heat. Her father called her into his study, a room that smelled of dry paper and old leather. Adelaide stood by the window, her back to them both, a rigid silhouette against the bright morning light. John Maddox did not meet his daughter's eyes. He sat behind his large oak desk, a place from which he issued pronouncements and settled accounts, and today his daughter was an account to be settled. He cleared his throat. "Cora," he began, his voice flat, administrative. "You are 23 years of age. It is time you made your own way in the world." He pushed a small stack of bills across the polished surface of the desk. 4 $5 notes. $20. "Your stepmother and I feel this is a fair and final settlement, a chance for a new start." Cora looked at the money, then at her father's face, which remained a careful, neutral mask. She did not ask why. She did not plead. She had seen this coming in the tightening of Adelaide's mouth over the years, in her father's increasing distance. She had been a loose thread in the tightly woven fabric of their new life, and now she was being snipped away. She simply nodded. I understand, she said, her own voice steady, a product of Silas's tutelage in emotional economy. She reached out and took the money. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She turned and walked out of the study, past the unmoving figure of her stepmother, and went to her small room under the eaves. She packed her few belongings into a single canvas satchel, 2 spare dresses, her mother's Bible, Silas's roll of tools, and the small wooden bird. She did not take anything else. She did not look for keepsakes or mementos. The house had been a place of residence, but it had not been a home for a very long time. Within the hour, she was standing on the porch, her satchel in her hand. Her father stood in the doorway. He looked uncomfortable, his duty done. There's unclaimed land west of here, he offered, a final, clumsy gesture. A man can file a claim. Start fresh. He handed her a slip of paper with the name of a town scrawled on it. Redemption. Cora took it without a word, turned, and walked down the path, not looking back. The gate clicked shut behind her, the sound as final and quiet as a signature on a deed. The journey west was a lesson in dust and distance. Cora paid a freight hauler $2 to carry her and her satchel for the first 50 miles, sitting perched atop a load of dry goods, the canvas wagon cover doing little to shield her from the relentless Texas sun. The landscape unrolled before her, a vast and unforgiving tapestry of bleached grass, thorny mesquite, and limestone outcroppings that jutted from the earth like broken teeth. The sky was a searing, endless blue. After the wagon turned north, she walked. She followed the rutted track of the road, her boots scuffing up clouds of pale dust that coated her dress and clung to her skin. She walked with a steady, unhurried pace, the rhythm of it a comfort, a way of moving through the world that was entirely her own. She ate the bread and dried apples she had bought with a few of her precious dollars, and she refilled her canteen at the occasional creek, the water warm and tasting of earth. At night, she rolled herself in her spare dress for a bit of warmth and slept in the shelter of a limestone bluff or a thicket of scrub oak, the tool roll a hard pillow beneath her head. She was not afraid. Silas had taught her to read the signs of the land, to know which plants were safe, which snakes to avoid. The solitude was a balm after the suffocating quiet of her father's house. Here, the silence was alive. It was filled with the hum of insects, the cry of a distant hawk, the rustle of some small creature in the brush. She felt a kinship with the tough, resilient things that survived in this harsh country. The gnarled live oaks, the prickly pear cactus, the land itself, cracked and dry but enduring. After 6 days of walking, she saw it, the town of Redemption, a small collection of wooden buildings shimmering in the heat haze, huddled along the banks of a mostly dry riverbed. It wasn't much, just a saloon, a general store, a blacksmith's forge, and a small clapboard building with a faded sign that read, Land Office. It was a place for beginnings and endings, a place where a person with nothing could try to claim something. Cora straightened her shoulders, brushed the dust from her skirt as best she could, and walked toward the sign, her hand in her pocket. Her fingers closed around the smooth, familiar shape of the wooden bird. The land office was small and smelled of stale cigar smoke and sweat. A harried-looking clerk with a green eye shade sat behind a counter, shuffling through a mountain of papers. His name was Mr. Beasley, and he looked at Cora with an air of profound weariness. "Help you?" he asked, not looking up. "I've come to file a claim," Cora said, her voice clear in the quiet room. Now he looked up, his eyes taking in her dusty dress, her youth, her solitary state. "Got the filing fee?" he asked, his tone skeptical. $10. Cora placed 2 of her $5 bills on the counter. Mr. Beasley grunted and pulled a large, leather-bound plat book toward him. Opening it to a map of the county, A grid of squares overlaid with notations and cross-hatchings. "Most of the good land's taken," he said, tapping a finger on the page. "River frontage, pasture land, all gone." He gestured to the less desirable sections, far from water, marked as rocky or heavily wooded. "What's left is what nobody wants." Cora leaned over the map, her eyes scanning the grid. She wasn't looking for pasture land. She was looking for something else, something her father and the men in this town would overlook. Her gaze fell on a small, oddly shaped parcel a few miles out of town, marked with a simple notation: "Limestone Quarry, flooded." "What about this one?" she asked, pointing. Mr. Beasley squinted. "That? Honey, that's just a hole in the ground full of water. Useless. Old limestone pit from when they built the courthouse. Hit a spring and it filled up 20 years ago. Can't farm it, can't graze it. Water's deep and cold. Folks call it the drowner's hole." A man leaning against the wall, a rancher by the look of his worn chaps, let out a short laugh. "Claiming the drowner's hole? What are you going to raise, catfish?" Cora ignored him. She looked at the shape of the claim on the map. It was small, only 40 acres, but it was set apart, isolated, and it had stone. Silas had taught her about stone. "I'll take it," she said. Mr. Beasley shrugged, as if to say it was her money to waste. He took her $10, filled out the paperwork with a scratchy pen, and stamped it with a heavy, final-sounding thud. "40 acres and a hole full of water, ma'am? It's yours." As Cora walked out, the rancher's mocking laughter followed her. "Maddox's Folly," he called out to the clerk. "Mark it down. Maddox's Folly." Cora did not turn around. She had her deed. She had a place. It might be a hole in the ground, but it was hers. The quarry was more beautiful and more desolate than she had imagined. It was a perfect, rough-hewn bowl carved out of the white Texas limestone, perhaps 100 yards across. The walls dropped sheer for 20 feet to the surface of the water, which was a startling, unnatural shade of turquoise, clear and still as glass. The sun beat down on the exposed rock, making the air shimmer with heat. The surrounding 40 acres were just as the clerk had described, a rolling landscape of scrub oak, cedar, and prickly pear, with thin soil and more rock than dirt. It was not a place for a farmer. But for Cora, it was a place of possibility. She spent the first few weeks living as she had on her journey, sleeping under a rock overhang and cooking over a small fire. She used Silas's tools to clear a small patch of land near the quarry's edge, cutting away the thorny brush and leveling the ground. She was patient, methodical. Every day she would walk the perimeter of her property, learning its contours, the way the light fell at different times of day, the places where deer came to drink from the quarry's edge. The town of Redemption kept its distance. When she went to the general store for flour and salt, people would nod curtly, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and amusement. They saw a foolish girl who had wasted her money on a worthless piece of land. They did not see the quiet competence in her hands, the steady resolve in her eyes. Then the summer of 1886 tightened its grip. The rain that usually came in May and June never arrived. The sky remained a pale, unforgiving sheet of blue. The creeks dried up, the grass turned to tinder, and the land cracked open like a broken plate. The drought was a hardship for everyone, but for Cora, it was a revelation. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, and then with gathering speed, the water level in her quarry began to drop, an inch a day, then 2, then 3. The turquoise water receded, exposing a band of dark, wet limestone along the quarry walls, a stark measuring stick of the relentless sun. By August, the water had fallen a full 12 feet. One morning, as she stood on the edge, looking down into the diminished pool, she saw it, a shape, dark and unnatural, emerging from the depths. It was near the center of the quarry, a strange geometry of straight lines and angles that did not belong in the natural world. It was the top of a wagon wheel. Cora's heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm in her chest. For several days, she did nothing but watch as the water continued to recede, revealing more of the sunken object. First the wheel, then the corner of a wooden wagon bed, then another wheel on the opposite side. It was a heavy freight wagon, tilted on its side, preserved in the cold, still water. The drought held, and by the end of the month, the wagon was almost fully exposed, resting on a submerged limestone ledge about 15 feet below the quarry's rim. The water now only came up to the wagon's axles. She had to know what was inside. Using a length of rope she'd bought at the general store, she carefully lowered herself down the steep rock face, her boots finding purchase on the rough-hewn stone. The air at the bottom was cool and damp, smelling of wet rock and decay. She waded through the knee-deep water to the wagon. It was old, the wood waterlogged and dark, but remarkably intact. The canvas cover had long since rotted away. In the back of the wagon, half buried in silt, was a heavy, iron-bound chest. It was locked. Using a pry bar from Silas's tool roll, Cora worked at the lid. The rusted hinges groaned in protest, but with a final, screeching complaint, the lock gave way. She lifted the heavy lid. Inside, stacked in neat, tight rows, were canvas sacks. She lifted one. It was heavy, impossibly heavy for its size, and it clinked with a soft, metallic sound. She untied the drawstring and poured a small amount into her palm. Silver dollars. Dozens of them. The entire chest was filled with them. As she stood there, staring at a fortune that defied comprehension, her eyes fell on something else. Something caught beneath the wagon's broken axle. It was a human skeleton, the bones bleached white, tangled in the remnants of old clothing. And then she saw another, a few feet away, half submerged in the mud. Two men. A small, sealed tin box was clutched in the bony fingers of the first skeleton. Cora gently pried it loose. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small leather-bound journal. The ink was faded and water-damaged, but much of it was still legible. It was a payroll ledger, and the last entry, dated October 12, 1866, told the whole story. It was the payroll for a cavalry unit, stolen by two men, Sergeant Thomas Riley and Corporal James Dunn. The final, frantic entry was from Riley. Dunn turned on me, shot me in the back as we were hiding the wagon. He tried to take it all. I pulled him in with me. We go down together. May God have mercy on our souls. It wasn't a gift left for her, not like in a storybook. It was the sordid end of a violent betrayal, hidden for 20 years, waiting for a drought and a determined woman to bring it to light. Cora sat on the edge of the quarry for a long time, the open journal in her lap, the weight of the discovery settling over her. This was not just treasure. It was evidence. It was a story of greed and death that had been her silent companion all these months. She knew she could not simply keep the silver. The bodies had to be reported. The story had to be told, or some version of it. She made her decision with the same quiet deliberation she applied to everything. She would be honest, but she would be careful. The next morning, she rode the mail wagon into Redemption and went to the office of the county sheriff, a man named Elias Abernathy. He was a tall, stooped man in his late 50s, with kind, tired eyes. Cora told him simply that the drought had lowered the water in her quarry, and she had found something she believed he should see. She did not mention the silver. Abernathy, accompanied by the town doctor, rode out to her claim. They looked down from the rim, their faces grim. Abernathy organized a team of men to winch the wagon and the remains out of the quarry. The discovery of the skeletons and the payroll ledger caused a stir in Redemption. The story of the 20-year-old robbery was resurrected from local legend into fact. The U.S. Marshals were contacted, and old records were checked. The payroll had belonged to the government, but after 20 years, the claim was considered abandoned. By law, a portion was due to the federal treasury, but the rest, as the discoverer and owner of the land where it was found, belonged to Cora. After the government took its share, Cora was left with over $30,000 in silver coin. The town of Redemption looked at her differently now. She was no longer Maddox's Folly. She was the Quarry girl, the one who had found the lost silver. Some were envious, others suspicious, but most were simply awed by her luck. Cora, however, knew it wasn't just luck. It was patience. It was the drought, and it was her refusal to see the quarry as worthless. With a portion of the money, she went back to the land office and bought her 40 acres outright, her title now clear and indisputable. Then, she began to build. She hired the town blacksmith, a burly German named Mr. Schmidt, to forge her a set of custom stone-cutting tools. She bought a sturdy mule and a cart, and she began the slow, arduous work of quarrying limestone from the walls of her own land, the very same stone that had hidden her fortune. She was not building a grand mansion. She was building a small, solid house, a place that would stand against the wind and the sun, a home built not just with money, but with her own 2 hands. The work was the hardest she had ever known, but it was a good, clean hardship. Each morning, she would rise with the sun and descend into the quarry. She learned the language of the stone, how to read its grain and its faults, where to set her chisels to make a clean break. She would cut and shape the limestone blocks, her arms aching, her hands raw, but her spirit steady. The rhythmic strike of her hammer on steel became the new song of her life. She was not entirely alone in her labor. The community, once so quick to mock her, began to approach, one by one, not with words of friendship, but with quiet acts of practical help. Mr. Abernathy, the sheriff, would ride out once a week just to check on her, his presence a silent promise of protection. Mrs. Gable, the baker's wife, a woman with flour-dusted hands and a kind face, began bringing her a loaf of fresh bread every few days, leaving it on a rock near her work site without a word. A young carpenter named David, who had watched her work with a quiet admiration, offered to help her frame her roof in exchange for some of her cut stone for a new hearth he was building. He showed her how to join the timbers, how to ensure the pitch was right to shed the rain. Mr. Schmidt, the blacksmith, stopped by to sharpen her tools, refusing any payment. "Good steel needs a good stone," he'd say with a gruff nod. "And a good worker." They were drawn not by her money, but by her work. They saw in her the same qualities they valued in themselves: resilience, independence, and an unwavering commitment to a difficult task. They saw her transforming a place of death and derision into a place of life and purpose. Through the shared language of labor, a community began to form around her. Her small stone house rose slowly from the ground, block by block. It was a simple structure, just 2 rooms and a deep-set porch facing the quarry. But it was hers. Every stone was a testament to her endurance. Every joint was a mark of her skill. She was not just building a house. She was building a life, a foundation of stone and self-reliance that no one could ever take from her. By the time the first cool winds of autumn swept across the plains, the house was finished. The roof was on, the windows were glazed, and a small, efficient wood stove stood in the corner, ready for winter. The people of Redemption no longer spoke of Maddox's Folly. They spoke of the Quarry House, and of Cora Maddox, the woman who had built it. Her name was known. She had a place. Her small enterprise of selling cut stone was thriving. Builders and masons from miles around would come to her, respecting the quality of her work. The quarry, once a symbol of her isolation and foolishness, had become the source of her livelihood, her home, her identity. It was no longer a drowner's hole. It was a living place, its waters reflecting the sky, its stone walls providing shelter and purpose. Cora established her own small rituals. In the mornings, she would drink her coffee on the porch, watching the light catch the surface of the water. In the evenings, after a long day of work, she would sit in the same spot, the silence no longer empty, but full of the peace she had earned. The town of redemption had accepted her, not because she was rich, but because she was a part of the landscape now, as solid and enduring as the stone she worked. She was invited to the church socials, and David, the young carpenter, would often stop by on Sundays, not to talk of work, but to share a quiet hour with her on the porch, their conversation as easy and unhurried as the slow drift of the clouds. She had found more than silver in the depths of the quarry. She had found a place to belong, a community that valued her for who she was, and a deep, unshakable sense of her own worth. The money was a tool, a means to an end, but the true treasure was the life she had built with her own hands, a life as solid and real as the stone walls that surrounded her. One evening, as a cool front moved in from the north, Cora sat by her window, a mug of warm tea in her hands. A fire crackled in the stove, filling the small house with a scent of cedar and warmth. The light from her lamp fell across the simple wooden table. On it sat two small objects. One was the little pine songbird her mother had carved for her, its wings still poised for a flight it would never take. The other was a single, heavy silver dollar from 1866, which she had kept from the payroll chest. She picked up the coin, its surface cool and smooth against her palm. It was a piece of a story of greed, betrayal, and death. A story that had, by a strange twist of fate, given her a new beginning. Then she picked up the bird. It was a piece of a different story, one of love and loss. A story that had sustained her when she had nothing else. She thought of Silas, his gnarled hands showing her how to hold a chisel, his quiet voice telling her that broken things were not always useless. He had seen the strength in her before she had seen it in herself. She thought of her father, of the $20 on the polished desk, of the quiet, administrative cruelty of her ejection. He had cast her out, seeing her as a liability, a problem to be solved. He would never know that his act of rejection had been the greatest gift he had ever given her. It had forced her to find her own way, to build her own world from the rock bottom up. Cora looked out the window at the quarry. The moon was rising, casting a pale, shimmering path across the dark water. The water that had hidden death now reflected the endless sky. Cora Maddox was 24 years old, and she was home. She had $20 to her name when she arrived in Redemption, and she had spent 10 of it on a hole in the ground. It was the best $10 she ever spent. What forgotten places in your own life hold hidden value? What have you built from the things that others have thrown away? We'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Thank you for joining us, and be sure to subscribe for more tales of resilience and unexpected discovery.